Yo, what is up? It's JJ, and in this episode of Frame Explain, I'm going over one of my favorite images of chef and owner Hiroshi Kimura of Hiroshi in Los Altos. And just to start off, this is the final image that still lives in my portfolio. Mind you that this image was created at the end, or rather in December 2016. And this is him just in front of his glassware, this very exclusive and expensive glassware that was made specifically for the restaurant that was shipped from Japan. And so let's just kind of rewind back as far as how I got into position of creating this image, and then of course peeling back as far as a post-production for this exact portrait. So back in 2015, I actually became the producer for this guy, Kimura's campaign, his crowdfunding campaign. And it was this product that he was creating called the Holly Orb, which it was a device that kind of hooked up to your TV. And then you can actually control this very slick UI, your photos and videos. And it was a great way to kind of connect other families as well, just using the largest screen in your home, which is typically a TV, to view and enjoy the photos and videos that are typically shared among family. So I produced a crowdfunding campaign, and when the campaign did conclude in 2017, we raised about $40,000, and we ended up having a follow-up campaign as well, where I ended up producing a different video on top of that, basically like a commercial. And so quick shout out to Sabrina, who's the assisting me for that day, but also the model or actor for the shoot. So in 2016, Ken, again, the guy who hired me initially, I guess he was friends with Hiroshi because he had asked me, letting me know that, hey, they're about to open up a restaurant in Los Altos and they need some assets. So photos of the food, photos of the glassware, and then of course a portrait of Hiroshi himself. And of course, being a photographer first, I was like, yeah, definitely count me in. Let's go ahead and set this thing up. So you can see right here that the exterior of it, even the glass and everything like that, the windows, they weren't even finished yet. So they were preparing for their opening. And again, this restaurant being exclusive, AKA expensive, you can kind of see right here that there's this table right here. And so this oak table apparently is like $75,000, $100,000. And the very exclusive part of this restaurant is that you can't just come in and sit down. You actually have to reserve well advance, but more importantly, you have to buy out the restaurant, because this literally is just one table for the restaurant, which is kind of crazy. And some behind the scenes here is that I was shooting some of the Wagyu, excuse me, beef that was shipped from Japan. And again, a lot of this stuff is made to order because you have to let the restaurant know how many people are coming in. And yeah, it's expensive. And only later on, by the way, I got hired again to produce the images for their menu because of the pandemic, for their takeout menu, that I did get to try it. And obviously it is very damn good. So here is my typical setup when I was, at least during this time. I was bringing a C-stand, a boom arm. Again, this is the Photech soft lighter. And I'm at this time I was using Alien B's, or rather Paul C. Buff's Einsteins. So that's like an upgrade from their Alien B ware. And usually I had three. I think only for the shoot, I just took two. So I had one boom on the top, and then I had one over here, kind of like a kicker, and then some whiteboard just to kind of fill it in. And that's just me using the rocket blower for the lens and camera as a stand-in. I was shooting tethered at the time. This is the kind of an older 13-inch MacBook Pro. And the camera that I was using was the Pentax 645Z. So going into his portrait, there was a language barrier. So he speaks Japanese and very little English. But again, what I kind of rely on are our hand signals. And so before we even start, I would always tell the client right before the headshot is that I'll be kind of letting them know as far as how to move. And so usually I'll say, okay, my hand over here will control your head. When I have my finger, will control the tilt. And again, when it comes to producing a headshot, I give this very quick intro and tutorial on how to pose. And so usually it's, head down, go ahead and chin forward, and just again giving those small directions, but using hand signals for sure really helps this out, especially in this case when I of course could not speak Japanese. Here's a behind the scene shot that Nicole took, and again just providing that direction. I did mention before in the previous video with the CEO Jessica Grossman how I like to square my subjects' shoulders, and by doing so I'll have them cross or rather fold their arms, but instead of doing it like this I'll have them just kind of hold their elbows. So in between the shots I'm letting Hiroshi know like, all right, go ahead and hold the elbow, and of course you know he knew exactly what to do with those instructions. And then here I am just kind of reviewing the images real quick with Hiroshi. And actually the lens that I was using, and again I mentioned in my Pentax review, I have three main lenses that I use. It's the 55, the 90, which are my main, and then every now and then I'll use the 35. And so I'm actually using the 35 here, which I didn't even remember. And as far as the layout goes, you can only see the Photech here, but again, I do have a light on the very back that I used for the product photos that was giving him that rim light, right? So if you see in the final image, you'll see a light that comes across over here. So now let's just go ahead and take a look into photo mechanic, and I'll show you as far as how the shoot itself unfolded. So you can kind of see right here that I was already doing some product shots in the beginning of the day, and again I had mentioned before that it's always important to have a stand-in. So in this case I had Nicole, and you'll see here that my initial shot here was just with one light, and you'll see that key right over here, and there's the catch light. So just having Nicole kind of pose and make sure that I can dial in my settings. And if you're curious as far as the settings, as mentioned, it was the 35mm lens, just so I can get more of the backdrop in this case because of the really nice and fancy glassware. And ISO 100, shutter was a 1/80th, and an aperture f8. And you can see right here that I fired the rim light, and it's obviously pretty off. So I'm just kind of fine tuning it at the moment. One thing that you do want to avoid are these specular highlights, right? So it's kind of distracting that you have a bright spot that's not essentially to your subject. So in this case, here's our key, and then now I'm working with that rim light, right? The hair light, rim light are kind of interchangeable, but you'll see here that the spill is going onto the wall. And in this case, this wall is not matte, but it has a shiny texture. So if you have a light shining on it in a particular angle, you will get a specular highlight, which is, in my opinion, and most people will agree, that is not pleasing. So let's see if I can fine tune that. And there you go. So I think in this case, it was both moving the light, the hair light, but also adjusting my angle. So basically I'm moving so then Nicole's head is covering that specular highlight, and that's helpful if you can't really avoid it. So the only other modifier that I had other than the Photech were barn doors on the rim light specifically, and then a grid. And I think I was shooting with like a 30-degree grid, which will focus the light instead of having a more spill, right? And so here's at it again. So now let's bring in Hiroshi, okay? I do want to point out in this particular image why it doesn't work, okay? You can see here that we have a pretty good highlight here, but in my opinion, it's a little bit too strong in terms of the relation of the key light. So our key light again is over here, and then the hair light or the rim light is right over here. You'll also see that overall, you don't see a catch light on his eyes. And then I would say that the light that's hitting his face, his skin, is also pretty hot. It's pretty bright. Again, that specular highlight. And the reason why is because he currently is too far from the key light. So if you're working with flash, and especially with modifiers, and you want really soft light, one usual way is that you can bounce the light, right? So currently right now, like with my setup, I have a light, an LED light that's hitting the white wall behind my computer, and it's bouncing to light myself, but the green screen that I'm chroma keying out. In this particular case, if you want the light to wrap around, you could bounce it, but the problem is you won't get highlights, or rather you won't get a catch light on the eye. And the other thing too is that when it's too soft, there's no contrast. So there is a balance between having flattering light and then making sure that there's enough contrast so then you can see more detail. In particular in here, it's the details of his skin and then the hair. And then of course in front of what he's wearing, the chef apron or suit, chef, I don't know what you call that. So at this point, I'm letting him know, all right, Hiroshi, go ahead and come closer to me. And there you go. And that's a significant improvement, right? So we had this, which is literally the first frame that I took of him, and moving on to here. And now I'm just trying to fine tune it. And I guess even though I had Nicole as a stand-in, she was a lot shorter than Hiroshi. So now I'm seeing that's a little too hot over here. Now I'm looking at the rim light, and Nicole's actually here offside, and I'm letting her know to basically move the light either clockwise or counterclockwise. But now the problem that I have here in this particular image, I'm not really, again, focusing for now his arm placement and his overall body posture, but I am looking again still at the light. So now I'm just trying to fine tune this. So far I think I've either moved a little bit further, or the light a little bit further, or also dialed back the light itself. But my settings at the moment has not changed. And I take that back. It looks like my shutter, I'm dragging my shutter. And this is the part where if you want to drag your shutter, basically you're adding ambient light in. Okay, so I'm gonna try and see if I see. So I'm just looking back here. I initially, when Nicole started at 1/80th, and as I was doing her test shots, I was actually dragging the shutter at 1/50th. And a quick information regarding shutter, especially with strobes, is that typically you don't want to shoot with slow shutters because you're introducing camera shake. But if you're using flash, the flash in itself will stop your subject in motion. So that way you'll still get a crisp image because the flash is technically stopping your subject. And then when you're dragging the shutter, you're just letting the ambient light burn into the image. So I guess I wasn't even paying attention to that part. But in here, I guess when I dialed it in, the aperture was still f8, but the shutter was at 1/25th of a second. So super slow. Even though I was hand holding this, I was not using a tripod. But you can tell right away that it's still sharp, other than the focus not being there for this test shot. So looking at the roll for Hiroshi, I am actually using a shutter speed of a 25th of a second. And mind you, the max flash sync speed of the Pentax is 1/25th of a second. So now I'm just kind of playing with him and asking him, go ahead and move, look here, look there. I'm just trying to find a better angle. And here's probably the best take that you'll see of how far and also how bright the hair light or the rim light is. So that's over here, again, with the barn doors to control the spill. And then the grid to kind of focus out more on his left side of the cheek. So again, these are super crisp. These are not edited. These are still raw, but I'm still trying to get that pose. And this, by the way, is the pose that I ended up, or rather the image that I ended up settling with. Take that back. I think it's this one. Right. So again, when you're looking or doing headshots, I'm always looking at the overall facial expression. So you'll see a difference between this and that, right? Just looking at the eyes. So again, when I'm doing headshots, I'm instructing people and reminding them a good headshot kind of conveys interest. So if I'm listening to you, or you're listening to me, you're probably like, you're probably agreeable, at least I hope you are, where your eyes are just like this, okay? But if your eyes are more of like, in this case, a deer in headlights, where it's like that, it's more of a blank stare. And so that's a part where I'm very mindful when it comes to posing and ensuring that I have a certain expression that conveys exactly that of interest. And that's pretty much it. And I was just doing some other shots for the restaurant, which this painting, by the way, on a side note, or rather this mirror was created by like the son of a very famous Japanese director. So the whole place was pretty expensive. So now let's go ahead and pop into Photoshop and kind of show you how I built this image. So again, this is the raw image. You'll see that this is actually a light sculpture over here. You'll see that the key light has some spill onto the backdrop. And then some elements in here as well that I noticed that for some reason that we didn't have the glass closer. And let me just now walk you through with what I did. Now in the last video, what I ended up showing was how I create a fake HDR image. So what I'm doing is I'm combining the exposure, the original exposure, but I'm also combining a duplicate version of that, which the shadows are lifted and then the highlights are pulled back. So just to give you, that's 20% by the way, which is what I settled with. This is 100%. And you'll see my mask, by the way, which is I don't want to touch any parts of the skin, but really just everything around. And again, this does not look real. It looks pretty bad because this is at 100%. But you'll see here that this is what that layer does as far as lifting the shadows and then pulling back the highlights. So let's go back to the 20%, which is what I settled with. Now you'll notice here, let me just zoom in on the face. You guys see that? So the app that I use to make this is Portrait Professional. It's a plugin in Photoshop that does skin retouching, that helps kind of improve the eyes, even the smile. It's basically like Photoshop's liquify tool, but just made simpler. Basically, it walks you through with actions, and you can have sliders to adjust different parts of the face. So I use this tool a whole lot. For me, it helps refine, again, the contrast and the contours of the face. So I do that, but I don't do anything crazy in terms of, again, how powerful that software is. So let me just go back here, zoom out here so I can see what's happening. All right, so after I combined, or rather made an HDR image, and then adjusted the skin tones with a contrast, the next step for me was cropping it. And so I found that this crop worked overall for the image, right? So again, we have a too wide of an image, and there's some elements that I just wouldn't want to keep. But this part I can Photoshop, this part I could have kept or Photoshopped out, but it was really like this light, this spill that was onto the wall from the hair light. So I ended up cropping it. Now here's the before and after again. Okay. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking the burn tool and I'm literally just painting, right, to make those contours. So again, with the HDR image, the shadows were lifted, but I also want to ensure that there's enough contrast here. And in my eyes, they look a lot better with it. And now this next layer I labeled for eyes. And so let me just zoom in and show you what happened in terms of the eyes. So you see that? There are his glasses are kind of dirty, which I guess in hindsight I probably could have cleaned. But you'll see here there's a specular highlight here, over here, here, here. It looks like I use the same layer to fix the lip as well. And actually, I did remove some of the dust, if you look over there. Okay. And I did it even further with the next layer, again, that I labeled eyes. Not so sure what. Okay, so let me rewind back, or pull back. So that layer was specifically for the eyes. And now you'll see that with this layer, I remove this highlight over here. Again, all I want the focus immediately is for you to look at him first. A good headshot portrait does that. And then typically you will look elsewhere as well. But you also don't want to be distracted when you finally do look around. You're like, oh, that looks weird, or that looks kind of off. So I ended up removing this light. And the next step, kind of hard to see, but originally his jacket, once I was doing my color grading, it became a little too cool. So right now it looks actually more blue than black, and the chef's coat, that's the actual term, is actually more black than blue. So now I ended up just neutralizing it by adding more warmth to it. So again, that's before, and then that's after. Just back up here. So now here is that other piece. So right, looking over here. So you have these two glasses that are obviously there, and then this glass was probably over here, but because I was using a fairly wider lens at 35, it got cropped out. So photoshopped it back in, and that's basically the same one. I just copied this one and then put over here. And the very last thing, let me just center this, was adding a vignette. Okay, so that's before, and you'll see here that there's even almost like a light leak on top. Again, I can care less for the ground right now. And then just adding that vignette. So that's the image that we settled with, that ended up being on the website. And then of course, because the restaurant, oops, let me move this back in. Because the restaurant is fairly exclusive, it garnered a lot of press, and I can kind of show a little bit as well. So that's us, by the way. That's Ken, that's myself, and then that's Chef Hiroshi. And one of the articles that came out, you know, in the year following, when it got more press in 2017, was this headline from Business Insider: inside the $600 a head Silicon Valley restaurant where Google and Apple executives eat gold fleck steaks. So this whole article, this guy kind of comes in, kind of, you know, lays down as far as who has lived in Los Altos. Basically, it's a very prominent community or city, and goes over as far as how the restaurant works. You can't just walk in, as mentioned. There is that table. There's a better image, by the way, how that table is, where you can only see, I think in this photo, 8 people. So it's an 800-year-old Japanese keyaki tree, and apparently took 10 men and a small crane to lift the table to the restaurant. And then there you go. Here's that image that was created. Again, when I get hired, typically I would love credit, but then I'm typically hired by the company. And so when it says courtesy of, it's courtesy of Hiroshi because I made the images for him, and then of course the company. So that's pretty much it. Again, I hope that this episode kind of gives a better insight, again, as far as portraits and my process. Hopefully there's something new along the way that you've learned. Maybe it's the positioning of the lights, maybe it's in Photoshop. But if you have any questions, again, let me know. Like the video, desubscribe. There's more of these coming through. And more importantly, I am in the process of getting more people, or rather other people involved. So not just myself, where I'm going through my images, going through the outtakes and explaining as far as how I made the images, but I will be interviewing other people who have either created or contributed to an image. So this includes lowest hanging fruit is our photographers, but also cinematographers, makeup artists, stylists. So I'm in the process of getting more people involved and sharing their stories of Frame Explain. Cheers.